All right, so in the last chapter we had read Roscuro and Midge made their way up to the princess's room and with a knife threatened her. So now we're going to see if they're able to carry out their plan, taking her to the dungeon and making her the maid. So, chapter 38, To the Dungeon. The strange threesome made their way down the golden stairs of the castle. The princess and Midge walked side by side, and Roscuro hid himself again in the pocket of Midge's apron, and Midge pointed the sharp tip of the knife at the princess's back, and together they went down, down, down. The princess was led to her fate, and around her everyone slept. The king slept in his giant bed with his crown on his head and his hands crossed on his chest, dreaming his wife, the queen, was a bird with green and gold feathers, who called his name, Philip, 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 without ceasing. Cook slept in a too small bed off the kitchen, dreaming of a recipe for soup that she could not find. "Where did I put that?" she mumbled in her sleep. "Where did that recipe go? It was for the queen's favorite soup. I must find it." And not far from Cook, in the pantry atop a bag of flour, slept the mouse Despereaux, dreaming, as you know, reader, of knights in shining armor, of darkness and of light. And in the whole of the darkened sleeping castle, there was only one light of the candle in the hand of Midgery Sow. The candle shone on the princess's dress and made it sparkle, and the princess walked tall in the light and tried not to be afraid. In this story, reader, we have talked about the heart of the mouse and the heart of a rat and the heart of a serving girl, Midgery Sow, but we have not talked about the heart of the princess. Like most hearts, it was complicated, shaded with dark and dappled with light. The dark things in the princess's heart were these: very, very, very hot, burning coals of hatred for the rat, who was responsible for her mother's death. And the other darkness was a tremendous sorrow, a deep sadness that her mother was dead, and that the princess could now only talk to her in her dreams. And what of the light in the princess's heart? Reader, I am pleased to tell you that the pea was a kind person, and perhaps more important, she was empathetic. Do you know what it means to be empathetic? I will tell you. It means that when you are being forcibly taken to a dungeon, when you have a large knife pointed at your back, and when you are trying to be brave, you are able still to think for a moment of the person who is holding the knife. You are able to think, "Oh, poor Midge. She just wants to be a princess so badly, and she thinks that this is the way. Poor, poor Midge. What must it be like to want something that desperately?" That, reader, is empathy. And now you have a small map of the princess's heart: hatred, sorrow, kindness, and empathy. The heart that she carried inside her, and as she went down the golden stairs and through the kitchen, and finally, just as the sky outside of the castle began to lighten, down into the dark of the dungeon with a rat and a serving girl. Chapter 39. Missing. The sun rose again and shed light on what Roscuro and Midgery had done. And finally Despereaux awoke, but alas, he awoke too late. "I haven't seen her," Louise was shouting, "and I tell you, I wash my hands of that girl. If she's missing, I say good riddance. Good riddance to that bad rubbish." Despereaux sat up. He looked behind him. Oh, his tail. Gone. Given over to the knife. And where should the tail be? Nothing but a bloody stump. And more foul play. "Gregory dead!" shouted the cook. "Poor old man. That rope of his broke by who knows what, and it made him lost in the dark and frightened to death because of it. It was just too much." "Oh no," whispered Despereaux. "Oh no, Gregory is dead." The mouse got to his feet and began the long climb down from the shelf. Once he was on the floor, he stuck his head around the door of the pantry and saw Cook standing in the center of the kitchen, wringing her fat hands. Beside her stood a tall woman, jangling a ring of keys. "That's right," said Louise, "and the king's men were down there, searching for her in the dungeon, and when they came back up, who do they have with them? They have the old man, dead, and now you tell me that Midge is missing? I say, who cares?" Despereaux made a small noise of despair. He had slept too long. The rat had already acted. The princess was gone. What kind of world is it, Miss Louise, where princesses are taken right from under our noses, and the queen drops dead, and we can't even take comfort in soup? And with that, the cook started to cry. "Shush," said Louise. "I beg you, don't say that word." "Soup," shouted Cook. "I will say it. No one can stop me. Soup, soup, soup." And then she began to cry in earnest, wailing and sobbing. "There," said Louise. She put her hand to touch Cook, and Cook slapped it away. "It will be all right," said Louise. Cook brought the hem around her apron to wipe at her tears. "It won't," she said. "It won't be all right ever again. They've taken our little darling away. There ain't nothing left to live for without the princess." Despero was amazed to have exactly what his heart had spoken out loud by such a ferocious, mouse-hating woman as a cook. Louise again reached out to touch Cook, and this time Cook allowed her to put an arm on her shoulder. "What will we do? What will we do?" wailed Cook, and Louise said, "Shush, shush, there." Alas, there was no one to comfort Despero, and there was no time anyway for him to cry. He knew what he had to do. He had to find the king. For having heard Roscuro's plan reader, Despero knew that the princess was hidden in the dungeon, and being somewhat smarter than Midge Sow, he sensed the terrible unspoken truth behind Roscuro's words. He knew that Midge could never be a princess, and he knew that the rat, once he had captured the pea, would never let her go. And so the small mouse, who had been dipped in oil and covered in flour, and relieved of his tail, slipped out of the pantry past the weeping ladies, and he went to find the king. The end.